If I were asked about the kindest person in the world, I'd say it was my sister, Clementine. She was a true guardian angel for many people in this world. And if the world takes such people away, then where's justice? Tears ran down my cheeks. I cast a look at the coffin in which Clem lay, passed the word to the priest, and took my seat next to our parents. My sister was murdered several days ago, in the apartment she rented, with the prize that Clementine was awarded on the day of her murder. The National Society Daughters of the American Revolution annually awards women who devote their lives to helping the unfortunate. The day of the award was the last time I saw Clem. My sister worked at a free clinic where she helped the poor, and she was also a member of Doctors Without Borders. In the recent 4 years, she frequently went to Africa to treat children. She deserved the award more than anyone else. But standing on the stage and holding the prize in her hands, Clementine was speaking like someone who didn't deserve it, forcing a smile for a photo. "What was happening to you, sis?" 4 years ago, my sister refused from the apartment in a prestigious neighborhood our parents had bought for her. She sold her fancy car, a present from them for graduating from the university. I also received such presents from them, but unlike my sister, I didn't refuse from them. Earlier, Clem and I used to be frequent guests at the loudest parties and social events. But then everything changed. Clementine began devoting all her time to her work. She stopped talking to her friends and rented the apartment, the one that her salary as a doctor at a free clinic allowed her to rent. She distanced herself from everybody else and retreated into her shell. I remembered congratulating my sister on the award, but she only said without any joy, "I don't deserve it." I offered her to go to a party, but she refused, saying she wanted to rest. The last thing I told my sister was, "See you later, Boar." It wasn't "I love you" or "You did so great. You're the only person who deserves it." "No," I said. "See you later, Boar." The tears flowed from my eyes again. My throat constricted. I ran out of the church thinking I was going to suffocate. Not far from the church, a sad marten stood leaning on the tree, holding a cigarette and humming, "Oh, my darling Clementine." He was one of Clementine's friends, and she used to spend a lot of time with him. I even think he was in love with her. We talked a little about Clem. I asked him when was the last time he saw her. Martin said it had been a few months ago and that they hadn't communicated much. After the ceremony, our parents organized a funeral feast. Clementine's best photos were arranged on one of the tables. In one of them, she was, with a broad smile on her face, hugging her friends, Martin, Diane, and Ben. They were all standing in front of the car with their suitcases. The date was June 3rd, 2014. All 4 of them had just taken their first steps in adult life. Diane had been hired by a private legal firm, and she had even spoken in the courtroom. Martin had found a job as an entertainment show host at the local TV station. Ben had been invited as a manager to one of the best restaurants in the city. And Clementine had received a job at one of the most prestigious and expensive clinics. She decided to celebrate her first success as an adult by going on a trip across several states. But Clementine returned in just a few days. It was then when my sister devoted herself to people who lived in misery. While Diane became a partner of the city's most renowned legal firm, Martin was a TV personality, and Ben was a businessman. I heard he went through a series of bankruptcies, but judging from the car he drove, he still had the money. The police finished working in Clementine's flat and we could take her belongings. Collecting them, I couldn't hold back my tears. Only when I was ready to depart, I noticed the vent shaft in the room. As teenagers, we often took down the cover and hid our secrets in the shaft. I put my diary and cigarettes in it. What if Clementine hid something in there? I found a strange notebook in the shaft. Its pages were covered with phrases like, "I'm so sorry." How can I forget it? It's inexcusable. How could I undo it? How do I expiate my sin? And many more. And there was the date, June 3rd, 2014, and the word fantasy spelled in all caps on one of the pages. I also found a video camera and a matchbox with a strange logo, a smiling beer mug, in the niche. I took the camera and played one of the recorded files. I saw Clem on the screen. She was in tears. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Wright," she said, "I've been trying to find the courage to talk to you for a long time. I feel far too overwhelmed, and I am ready to take the responsibility for what happened." Then my sister went silent and looked over her shoulder at the door. A male voice called her, "Clem, are you home?" and then hummed, "Oh, my darling Clementine." My sister turned off the camera. The time and date of the record was 3 hours before her death. So Martin lied to me. But what worried me more was what Clementine could have done. I had to find out what had happened 4 years ago. The next day, Clementine's landlord called. He received some letters addressed to her. Among them, there was a notice of fine for traffic violation, with a photo of the driver behind the wheel and the place where it happened. It was a 5-hour drive from where we lived. I immediately went there. It was a calm little town. I showed my sister's photo to the passers-by in case somebody had seen her. Then I went to the local hospital, but there, nobody knew Clementine either. On my way out of the town, I saw a diner with the smiling beer mug logo, the same as on the matchbox in Clem's hiding place. So I decided to stop by. The woman at the counter was friendly and offered me their signature tomato soup. A man entered, greeting her loudly.
Hello.
"Good evening, Mrs. Wright." It felt like an electric shock. I showed her my sister's photo, and she recognized her. She said Clem had often stopped by her diner. She'd always ordered coffee and took the same table, where she sat with a sad expression on her face. The table the owner showed me was vacant, so I went to it. I sat down at it and looked around. I saw a notice board outside the window. A smiling young man's blue eyes were looking at me from it. It was Billie Wright. The newspaper clipping next to it said that he didn't come back home on June 3rd, 2014. June 3rd, 2014. The date from Clem's notebook. Did she have something to do with his disappearance? When I returned, I decided to see Martin. I chose a crowded place. I immediately asked him why he'd lied to me. It turned out that he and Clem had started dating the previous month. That night, Martin was planning to stay at Clem's, but they had a fight and he left. Then I asked him who Billie Wright was. Martin froze, but then stood up sharply, ready to leave. After I warned him I was going to the police department, he promised to tell me everything if I didn't give away the secret. This is how I learned that 4 years ago, Martin, Clementine, Diane, and Ben struck this young man by car late in the evening. Diane was driving. She had a breakdown. In one of the victim's pockets, they found his driver's license. This is how they knew his name. They were afraid it would destroy their future, so they buried the body in the woods. But about 3 months later, they all received anonymous letters. Somebody knew what had happened and demanded $25,000 from each of them for keeping silent. The letter contained the instruction on where and when they had to leave the money. The next year, it all repeated. The friends received the same anonymous letters. However, Clementine refused to pay. Martin offered to pay for her, but she didn't agree. This was why they quarreled on the day of her murder. Martin gave me the details of the place where they'd overridden Billie, and it was not far from the town I knew well. I returned there, but I didn't find anything that could help me in my investigation. About 1 kilometer away from that place, I went to the roadside gas station. There, I saw a CCTV camera. It was directed towards the site of the accident. It meant it could have caught something, but the cashier told me he'd heard nothing about the accident, and the video wasn't stored for more than a month. So, I went to Mrs. Wright's diner. When she brought me my coffee, a man entered. He approached the owner to say hello. Mrs. Wright told me he was the pride of their town. It took him just 3 years to have a hotel built by the lake, and it increased the number of tourists and the income of the local cafes. The man extended his hand to me, saying his name was Tyler, took his order from Mrs. Wright, and left. Building a hotel isn't cheap, especially in such a short term. Where did Tyler get the money? What does he do? I asked Mrs. Wright. She told me he received an inheritance, and before that, he'd worked at the gas station outside the town. It meant the man could witness the accident and then, through blackmailing, find the money to build the hotel. I went to the hotel and wandered around. I don't know what I was trying to find, but Tyler himself went outside. I expressed my excitement to him, promising to visit the place someday, and hurried to say goodbye to the potential murderer of my sister. Back home, I called a detective I knew and asked him to find out where Tyler had his money from. As it turned, there was no inheritance whatsoever. Back in the day, the man had been convicted for the drugs that he had been presumably selling at the gas station until the owner knew about it. However, he avoided the punishment, and the police had to let him go. After Tyler had the hotel built, they suspected that he could be selling drugs at it. But he had nothing to do with my sister's murder because it happened when the station wasn't operating, and Tyler was under arrest. Then I called Diane and asked for a meeting. she invited me to a coffee shop on the outskirts, saying she had another meeting nearby. It was very dark in the parking lot. I left my car and walked to the building, which, for some reason, was dark too. I suddenly heard a rustle behind me and then felt a sharp pain after I was hit on my head. I regained consciousness in something like a warehouse or a storeroom. It was full of crates with groceries. The labels read, "Fantasy." Next to the crates, there were the brand's advertising materials scattered on the floor. I heard the voices of Diane, Ben, and Martin. "We should get rid of her," Ben shouted. Diane was silent. Martin said he didn't agree to that. There was a constant hum in my head, but I eventually understood what had happened. Obviously, Diane told Martin and Ben about my call and invited me to the long-closed coffee shop. In the darkness, somebody knocked me out and dragged to this warehouse. Now, I was sitting tied to the chair while they were deciding what to do with me. I tried opening my eyes again and saw the word fantasy. And then I remembered it. I'd seen it in Clem's notebook. It seemed I was close to solving the mystery of my sister's death. I only wished I'd do that before her friends killed me. Ben noticed that I came too. He took the gag out of my mouth and asked me what I had told the police. Instead of answering, I asked Ben how he was doing and where he took the money to start new businesses for them, only to go bankrupt again and again, and to find some to pay the blackmailer. Furious, Ben slapped me. He lifted his hand to do it again, but Martin caught his hand. "What do you mean?" Diane asked me, but I kept speaking to Ben. This coffee shop had gone bankrupt too, hadn't it? And so had his company that sold groceries, the remnants of which were scattered around the floor. Diane was listening to me with her eyes narrowed. It seemed she started realizing something. "Yeah, Ben, where did you get the money?" she asked. Ben began shouting it didn't concern the matter at hand. "Do you want to go to jail?" he yelled. But Diane demanded the explanation. And Martin said it was better to go to prison for one unintentional killing than two, one of which is intentional and group. And then Ben barked so loudly that I closed my eyes. "Do you not count Clementine? I got rid of her, to save us all. The bitch was going to betray us." Martin just stared at his friend in bewilderment. "Could it be that you killed her because you didn't want to lose the money?" Diane asked. "Tell us, are you the blackmailer?" Ben laughed. "So what will you do? Complain to the police, tell them everything?" Finally, Martin realized everything and threw himself at Ben. They accidentally knocked me down with the chair, so I loosened the rope. Diane helped me because she didn't want to be involved in another crime. Martin said he didn't want to hide anything anymore, and the three of us tied Ben and called the police. Did I feel the relief knowing that Clementine's murderer had been punished? Yes. But the understanding that guilt had been gnawing at my sister's angel heart for years depressed me. Every day, she punished herself for what had happened and desperately wished to fix it. She had been gathering her courage bit by bit, and she was ready to confess everything. But she was too late. Clementine's heart was made for kindness, and it would have gone on like that had she lived. So now I have to do good for both of us. So a part of Clementine will keep on living in this world.